Okay, so what I want to kind of talk to everyone about tonight is delivering Dublin's cycle network. Um, and I suppose I kind of want to talk through how may we answer some of these questions here. Like, why do we need a cycle network? How much progress have we made? What's the process for getting this done? And how can we speed this all up? So, Dublin Cycling Dublin Cycling Campaign's vision is that Dublin becomes like a livable city where everyone can enjoy everyday walking and cycling. So there's a few things I want to stress in here. That's a livable city for everyone. And this is going to be really important now in just a bit of a moment. Okay, even before we start thinking about infrastructure, in my opinion, there are three things people need in order to cycle. So this is what they need, not to some extent what they might want. They need something that they can cycle. Is that a bicycle, a tricycle, a cargo bike, something that's suitable for their needs? They need the appropriate knowledge to know how to cycle. So they need to know how to cycle a bike. They might need to know some skills about how to cycle in traffic. They might need to know how to carry goods or children on their bike. So there's some kind of knowledge people need. And then the last one is this safe, suitable route for their needs. Everyone's needs is a little bit different here. And we'll jump into that in a little bit later in the presentation. At the end of the day, the way people travel the way they do is a very deeply personal choice. It's based on a huge number of criteria. So to some extent, even if we built a cycle network tomorrow, we might not see an explosion of cycling tomorrow until people make different choices. And we have to bear that in mind as well. Okay, but tonight I really just want to focus on this third bullet point. It's like a cycle route that's suitable for their needs. Okay, this is the 4 types of a cyclist research. It's from Dr. Jennifer Dill, who's a professor of urban studies and planning in the US. And she had this idea that for the most part, people fall into these 4 buckets when it comes to cycling. And to some extent, this is like a framework and a model that's useful for thinking about cycling, but it's not true that people fit into these buckets. It's just a useful way of thinking about this problem. And the idea is that a small subsection of the population, she estimated about 1%. When she did surveys, it was more like 4% of people are what it's in this kind of strong and fearless category. They will cycle kind of no matter the conditions. You have the enthused and confident who want to cycle and might cycle in mixed traffic, but really don't want to be. And then you've got this much bigger bucket, this like 50 to 60% of people who are interested in cycling, but very concerned. And to some extent, they're probably not going to cycle unless there's a safe cycle route. Okay, I'm going to give you some stereotypical images just to try and like help drive home what this might look like, just to try and kind of give you a bit more of a sense. So strong and fearless might be people who are happy to cycle on rural roads with fast traffic, or happy to cycle on multi-lane roads in the city centre. Enthused and confident is probably what most cycle commuters in Dublin look like. You're mixing with traffic, happy to have a segregated cycle lane where they're available, but you're kind of filling in the gaps. This last kind of big group is the interested but concerned, and they're the people who are going to cycle when there's good infrastructure. So you're probably not going to see that kid on the orange bike cycling in mixed traffic with buses on Rathdown Road. And so the infrastructure is to some extent most important for this category of people. Now, to some extent, where we all fall on these 3 things probably changes over time. I probably think I'm probably in this category most of the time. There are lots of roads in Dublin I wouldn't go cycling near. Murray took me out on the Green Hills Road not too long ago. I have literally no intention to ever cycle that road ever again because it was awful. It was one of the most intimidating cycling experiences I've had in a very long time. Okay, another group that might fit into this kind of like interested but concerned are kind of kids cycling to school. This is the D12 cycle bus. And to some extent, this group would not cycle unless they had this kind of critical mass that keeps them safe, this safety in numbers. Okay, when we look at the research for why people don't cycle, this is from the NTA's Bike Life report. The biggest reason is concerned about safety. Third reason is not confidence cycling. And there's a number of other reasons in there. I also kind of want to dig into the fourth reason there, not for people like me. Another way I think you could rephrase this is not enough people like me cycle, so I don't think it's for me. And to some extent, that kind of comes back to images like this. And if you had asked these people, I suspect most of them probably had no interest or little interest in cycling before this route was built. And they saw other people that looked like them cycling. So to some extent, I think you could tackle a large number of the problems here by providing improved infrastructure. The Bike Life report also has this really fantastic information kind of around demographics of who cycles at least once a week. And we can see there's a big gender imbalance. There's quite a large age imbalance. Younger people much more likely to cycle than older people. And then there's a huge difference between people who self-describe themselves as having a disability versus those who do not have a disability. So to some extent, if we are going to kind of smooth out those imbalances in cycling and get every one of those big three cohorts strong and fearless, enthused and confident, and interested but concerned cycling, we're going to need to build a cycle network that is suitable for everyone of all ages and abilities. Okay, before we kind of jump too far in, let's do like a quick definition of a cycle network. Okay, so a cycle network is made up of these four components. So the first are your sections. So these are your cycle lanes. There's some bit of protected infrastructure that runs from one place to another, from point A to point B. If you combine those with some intersections, those are your junctions. It's where one road meets another road or a cycle route meets a road, something like that. Those need to be safe and those need to be suitable for people. If you glue enough sections and intersections together, you can create a route. A route brings people from some place where they want to go from to. A route isn't useful if it only goes from nowhere to nowhere. It needs to actually connect two places that people want to be able to cycle from to. So from your suburb to the city centre, from your housing estate to a school, from your housing estate to the local GA club. Like those are routes. Now, if you take enough routes and you crisscross them, you get a network. So we get a network by taking these smaller components and gluing them up together to get a network. There's very few cycle routes in Dublin that are kind of clear and legible, that are safe, that have good junctions, and that kind of glue together well. The Grand Canal cycle route is probably one of the few that has done a really good job with this. And you see it in the morning. Well, you did, I suppose, pre-pandemic, where this cycle route was jammed with people going to work. Okay, so the National Transport Authority do have a plan called the Greater Dublin Area Cycle Network Plan. It was published in 2014. And effectively what this document tries to do is figure out where should the cycle lanes go. And they effectively produced a large document and a large series of maps that look like this. And effectively what this map is all about is saying that on these routes, they will try and make sure that there is either protected, segregated infrastructure, or that the route is low traffic enough and low speed enough for people to cycle in the road. So the red lines here are what are called primary cycle routes. The blue lines are secondary cycle routes, and the green lines are greenways. And then the dotted pink lines are what are called feeder routes. We could get into a whole kind of transport planning debate around kind of the different quality of these routes, but the idea is the red lines are where most people are going to want to cycle and where we probably should focus our time and energy. Okay, if you look at the Greater Dublin Area Cycle Network Plan for the 4 local authorities in Dublin, there's 237 kilometres of primary route, 383 kilometres of secondary, about 200 kilometres of greenway, and 434 kilometres of feeder route. There is an awful lot of stuff in here. It's a huge number of kilometers. So to give you some kind of idea, the Bus Connect project, which is absolutely massive and is going to cost probably about €2 billion in Dublin, is 200 kilometers. So we need 4 or 5 versions of bus connects in order to build the entire Greater Dublin Area Cycle Network plan. So to some extent, the plan is huge. It is very ambitious. But we also need to make sure this plan isn't just a document that's on the shelf. It's something that does get built, it does get implemented. Okay, so how much progress have we made building a cycle network in Dublin? I suspect most of you know the answer already, which is not a lot. Most of you haven't seen huge cycle lane improvements since the plan launched in 2014. So the Bike Life report says there's 84 kilometers of segregated cycle lanes in Dublin. So if we don't look at the feeder routes from the network plan, which are mostly along quiet streets where there won't be segregated cycle lanes, we see that we've built maybe about 10% of the network. Okay, so Cycling Campaign has been kind of using this tool for a while to track all the cycling projects that are happening across Dublin. We've been using it to kind of keep track of how projects are moving through the process, but we're also using it to track kind of key metrics like how many kilometers of cycle lane get built every year, how many projects move through the pipeline, where are the delays, and stuff like that. So we took a lot of that information and we've combined it down into this kind of next few slides. I suppose most of you probably aren't surprised to see that not a lot of stuff was delivered between 2014 and 2019. So this is the number of projects delivered each year. And then there's a big spike in 2020. If we look at it and how many kilometers of cycle infrastructure were delivered every year, we see that between 2015 and 2019, we were averaging maybe 3 kilometers a year. The plan includes 800 kilometers. If we're doing 3 kilometers a year, this is going to take us forever. To some extent, the shining hope there at the end is 2020. We're not finished 2020 yet. There's still 5 good weeks left in the year. We're at 33 kilometers. I think we might add another kilometer or 2 to that bar chart before the end of the year. At the same time, though, not every kilometer is created equal. Like, we could build a whole lot of kilometers of a cycle track that don't connect places together, that go through parklands that people don't want to cycle through. We could build a whole load of new cycle track in industrial estates on the west of Dublin, where very few people need them. Well, people do need them, but there's not a huge demand. And instead of building stuff in the city centre. So not every kilometer is created equal, but to some extent, we're seeing a good upward trend in 2020. Okay, so if we look at the 2014 to 2019 pace, it'll take us 280 years to build the cycle network. I'm not going to be around then. I'm not going to wait that long. So we got to change something. If we run at a 2020 pace for the next 25 years, we will build the cycle network. So to some extent, I think I do want to caution people that, like, a cycle network is not going to appear overnight. It is going to take time for us to build it all. 25 years feels about right for how long a project to redesign every road in the city should take. It's within our lifetime, hopefully for most of us, and it's somewhat achievable. I think we could probably do it faster than 25 years, but 25 years sounds like about the right time. Okay, so that was kind of looking back. Now looking forward, what is coming through the development process? So there's about 20 kilometers of cycle infrastructure under construction in Dublin right now. There's about 6 kilometers, which is about to go to tender. There's about 52 kilometers of cycle track in Dublin that has planning permission. We could build it tomorrow if we had finished the design work and finished the tendering work. So it's 53 kilometers of stuff we are approved to build. There's currently nothing going through the planning process right now in Dublin, but then there's another 132 kilometers, mostly inside of bus connects in that kind of pre-approval design stage, and another 15.2 kilometers in kind of projects that are in very early development stages, with, I'm sure, a whole lot of other projects even earlier in the process. Okay, so if we were to look and kind of map out the cycle network that we have in Dublin right now, this is kind of what it looks like. So what I'm counting here is mandatory cycle lanes that are 24-hour, that are more than 1.7 meters wide. So a proper painted cycle lane I'm counting things that are curb protected, and that's it. That's not a network. That's little bits of green lines scattered all over a map. There's not a huge amount of stuff in there. Okay, if we add in all the things that are under construction right now, we get to that. If we add in all of the projects with planning approval, we get to this stage. So some of the things we see are sections of the Royal Canal in the city centre, Clontarf to city centre, the Grand Canal, the Royal Canal out to Maynooth, and kind of the Malahide to Donabate Greenway in the north there, and Strand Road, kind of the big ones are in that list. If we add in all of the bus connect plans, and that project is still a good few years away, and some of it might not be finished construction for 7, 8, 10 years from now, we get to that. If we add in all of the other projects that are in early stages of development that have some kind of published plan for them, we add in that. And so to some extent, if we were to take all of the plans we have right now and build them, we would get to this. That's starting to look a bit more like a network. There's obviously still huge gaps in places. I think particularly if you look down at Dún Laoghaire and kind of the bottom right-hand corner of the map, you start to see maybe kind of the density of the green lines you might want to see. To some extent, this is not about just building a cycle route from every suburb to the city centre. This is about making sure that people can cycle around their local area as well. They can cycle to the shops, they can cycle to meet their friends, they can cycle to the GA club. Obviously, there's still lots of gaps in this. I think one of the big standout areas is kind of Raheny, Artane, Beaumont. Besides the Malahide Road, there's no plans up there. There's a big need for more stuff kind of around Blanchardstown as well, around Tala, and other areas. Like, to some extent, what we have in the planning pipeline is nowhere near enough to where we need to get ourselves there. But that's okay, because to some extent, we're saying we can build it in 20 years. So we still got time to kind of come up with new plans and start moving those through the process as well. Okay, so I suppose one of the big things about cycling infrastructure is it is a massive chicken and egg problem. I have heard maybe not exactly this quote, but almost exactly this quote from far too many key decision makers in Ireland. I'm not going to name any names or any government departments, but I'm sure some of you could maybe guess. Cycling is a niche activity for a small subsection of the population. Investing in cycling won't make a meaningful contribution to Ireland's transport problems. And to some extent, we hear this because what they do is they look at the numbers of people cycling right now, where in some areas of Dublin, less than 2% of trips are by bike. In the city centre, we're maybe 13%, maybe 20%, somewhere in that range. So it's a small subsection. They don't see the potential. And so to some extent, we've always turned around and been like, you have to believe to some extent that this is possible. And the way we tell them to believe is by looking at the Netherlands. Look at the massive groups of people from all walks of society who cycle as part of their normal everyday life. Families cycling in the Netherlands is super common. So are older people. It is possible to do this. So seeing is believing is actually not the full quote. The full quote is actually seeing is believing, but feeling is the truth. It's a 18th century English philosopher, I believe was the quote. And what he's saying is like seeing is only believing, but it's when you start to feel this, that when you experience it, is it actually real? And to some extent, I think we're starting to see in certain points of Dublin, we're starting to see this become real, become reality. And as a result, it's much easier to feel this idea that cycling could be for everyone if we design for it. So top two photos are coastal mobility route in Dún Laoghaire. Huge increases in cycling, huge diversity of people cycling. I saw one business owner in Dún Laoghaire kind of talk about the proposals to make Dean's Grange Road one way with a kind of a similar project to this. Say, initially I was very against the project, but as she has seen the coastal mobility route bring tens of thousands of people into Dún Laoghaire, into her business, she has completely changed her mind. She has also gone and gotten a bike. So to some extent, when you build a proper route, And a coastal mobility route is a proper route. It gets a little bit funny around Clontarf, but it's a really good route. It's really attractive. It's really appealing. We do see huge increases in cycling. We're seeing other projects, kind of Griffith Avenue, Carrisford Avenue. We're seeing diversity of people cycling. We're seeing more older people cycling. We're seeing more families move by bike. So to some extent, this idea that it was only for a subsection of the population, it was for young men to cycle around or those who couldn't afford a car. These pictures, these images dispel that myth in a way that no photo of the Netherlands can. Because it's real, it's very real. It's your neighbor is the one who's cycling their daughter to school. It's a very, very different idea. Okay, so how does cycle infrastructure get built? I think it's really useful to kind of understand at a very high level, what is the process? Because it runs us into kind of the final question about like, how do we speed up this process? Okay, in my opinion, to build cycle infrastructure, you need three things. So this is a bit like the fire triangle. If you don't have all three components, the thing falls over. You need designers, you need funding, and you need political will. So if we dig into these, so by designers, I mean you need the engineers, the architects, the transport planners, the communication staff. These are the staff in the NTA, in the local authorities who are going to do these projects. You need funding. You need the money to design, build, and maintain the project. And then the one at the bottom is you need political will. You need key stakeholders bought in on the need for change. Who are the key stakeholders? Kind of varies a little bit from project to project. I think it includes people like senior officials in county councils. It includes councillors, TDs, community groups, you and me. We're all key stakeholders here, because to some extent we're talking about changing public space. And public space is something that is kind of owned by all of us in a shared manner. So you need these three things to get cycle infrastructure built. Okay, I want to change gears for a moment and talk about this. I call it the cycle of change. So this is the real chicken and egg problem. You need political will to get investment to get people cycling. But if you don't have people cycling, how do you get political will to get investment to get people cycling? So you have this chicken and egg problem of like, how do we get the political will to build infrastructure if there's no one cycling? And so you have this kind of starting problem. But the thing is, once you get past this starting problem, once you get this wheel spinning, and you get this wheel spinning faster and faster and faster, everything becomes much easier. The more people you get cycling, the more councillors are going to be looking for the cycling vote when it comes to the election, the more they're going to be interested in delivering these projects. The more investment we're going to see in both money and human resources to deliver these projects that will get more people cycling, and the cycle repeats itself round and round and round. So to some extent, if we want to dig in here, we get a positive feedback loop if more people start cycling. Because of safer routes, they've been easier access to a bike. So more Dublin bikes, more bike share, cheaper bikes. They see more people like me cycling, or they've learned some new necessary knowledge or skill they need to start cycling. On the flip side to this cycle can spin in reverse. And I think this is what we saw in Ireland as we moved from the 70s into the early 90s, where the number of people cycling in Ireland dropped pretty dramatically. Part of this was about kind of more people being able to afford a car, but it was also about more people were experiencing road danger. More people were dying on our roads while cycling. There was apathetic car response, bikes are getting stolen, and kind of people's life circumstances were changing. So to some extent, if we want this wheel to spin faster in a way that leads to more political will and more investment and more people cycling, we need more people to start cycling than are quitting. Okay, kind of jumping back into the process now. These are the 6 key government bodies who deliver cycle infrastructure in Dublin. So for the National Transport Authority and Transport Infrastructure Ireland, they are for the most part the funders of projects. And then you got the 4 local authorities. They are the implementers. They are the ones who are actually going to do the work. with the exception of bus connects, which the NTA is handling directly, but they're a bit of a special case. Okay, all cycle projects move through these 6 stages. Some move through them faster than others. The first stage is what's called concept design. To some extent, without being a little bit disparaging, this is the engineering equivalent of crayons on a map. They're going to kind of take a bit of a marker and go like, something like this probably will work. And the idea to some extent is to get a bit of buy-in at the start of a project. These are very early sketches. That goes into the preliminary design, where to some extent, maybe they'll have measurements of the road and they'll actually know, oh, we'll put a junction here, like the cycle lane will get wider at this point, etc. The bus stop will go there. The next step is the planning approval process. So this is where they get the legal permission to build the thing. This is kind of the big hurdle for a lot of projects. You've got detailed design. This is where the staff are going to take their reasonably good drawings from the previous stage, but do all of the complex detailed design work. So this is where they're going to figure out, how is the drainage going to work? Where are the curb lines going to be? How deep is the foundation for that curb? These are all the really complex engineering decisions that to some extent most of us don't even see. The next step is procurement. That's where they're going to take these designs, go out to tender, and get a contractor to go build the project. And then the last step is construction. All these projects take some kind of length of time to build. It's not uncommon to see projects take a year, 2 years, 3 years to construct on the road. Okay, I really want to dig into the planning process because to some extent it gets, this can be really useful as we move into the final step about how do we speed the process up. There are 4 main ways that cycle infrastructure gets built. There's Section 38 of the Road Traffic Act. There's Part 8 of the Planning and Development Regulations. There's the Planning and the Roads Act. And then there's private developers. So let's dig into some of these. Okay. Section 38 of the Road Traffic Act allows council officials to make changes to the road for traffic calming reasons, and this includes cycle lanes. They can only change existing roads. There cannot be any road widening. They, for the most part, need to stay within the existing curbs. This only needs the council official's approval. It's not a decision made by councillors. And the approval process for this can range from anywhere from like 2 weeks to 8 weeks. I've seen some projects take 8 months, but for the most part, it's very, very quick. So I'll give you an idea as to what can be done with Section 38. So the contraflow on Lombard Street in the city centre, Section 38. The Grange Gorman Road lower filtered permeabilities. This is a set of bollards to stop rot running on a residential road, Section 38. The interim Liffey cycle route project. So while the council officials did to some extent ask for the consent of the councillors before they built this project, they didn't need to, but they thought it was good practice to. The Benilda's Avenue project in Dún Laoghaire, kind of in Sandyford, these new concrete curbs was done under Section 38. They stayed within the existing road. All they did was change the existing road. And then, to some extent, the biggest and best example is of the coastal mobility route. They took an existing 2-way road, they made it 1-way, and they installed a 2-way cycle track. Change within the existing road. They reallocated road space. Okay, the next big one is Part 8. The council will take some project and they effectively, what they do is apply for planning permission to themselves. They publish the project, they ask for submissions from the public, and the councillors decide to vote to approve or reject the project. The timeline here is you need a proper planning application. While a Section 38 does require some documentation beforehand, a Part 8 requires the same amount of planning application that you would if you wanted to redesign your house or if someone wanted to kind of build a new commercial building. So comparing that planning application is a somewhat lengthy process that can take 3 to 9 months. The approval process is 20 weeks as laid down in the law, so that's about another 4 months. So Section 38 is weeks, this is months. Okay, So the Bonog, kind of this new path in Bonog and Clondalkin is a Part 8 scheme. It's outside of an existing road, so it needed Part 8 planning approval. The Royal Canal Greenway Phase 2 that just opened a few months back, it's not an existing road. It was wasteland to some extent. It needed Part 8 planning approval. They also needed to construct this bridge. You're not going to build a new bridge with Section 38. You need a Part 8. This bridge in Tala was also a Part 8. There's no existing road. They needed to build a bridge. Okay. The last kind of big one that the councils will use is like applying for permission from Bord Pleanála, either through the Planning Act or the Roads Act. These are normally large-scale construction projects with potentially significant environmental impacts. And as a result, they need what's called an environmental impact assessment report under EU law. These documents are 2,000 pages long, normally prepared by 40 to 50 very qualified professionals. You're going to need a noise analysis and a water analysis and a trees analysis. You're going to need a human health analysis. There's a huge amount of rigor in this process. And as a result, preparing an application takes 1 to 2 years, and getting a decision from Bord Pleanála takes 9 to 18 months. Okay, so the Baldwin Greenway in Fingal was one of these projects, very close to a number of very sensitive environmental areas, very close to a large number of bats that nested in the area, so it needed the approval of Bord Pleanála. The Bus Connects project being done by the National Transport Authority, that also needs a Bord Pleanála approval, and to some extent, it's a huge project, huge impacts. The other is they want to compulsory purchase some land, so they want to widen roads and buy bits of people's front gardens. That's going to need the approval of Bord Pleanála. Okay, the last kind of smaller section is private developers can deliver some amount of cycle infrastructure. The quality varies dramatically. Some of it's really good, most of it's not. There's a private development in Dunleary on kind of Kilmacud Road Upper that's about to happen that will take this cycle lane that ends into nothing and will extend it along the length of the front of the site. So they're going to deliver about 130 meters of new cycle infrastructure along this public road. They don't own all the way down to the junction, so to some extent this problem is going to exist, but just another 130 meters further down the road. So it's a small, somewhat meaningful, but not hugely significant change. The other is developers sometimes build if they have a large enough area, large enough development, they might build their own internal cycle network. Okay, I want to run through just 3 example projects because I think they're really useful for kind of understanding how some of these projects move through the process and where some of the delays come from. So the first one I want to look at is the Clontarf to City Centre project. It's a 2.7 kilometre project from Alfie Byrne Road to Talbot Street along North Strand. Anyone who comes from kind of the S2S or Malahide Road knows this section of road is awful. Particularly, I suppose, the section at North Strand Bridge, where I have been close past every single time I have ever cycled over that by either a bus or a taxi. It's just an awful section of road. They originally got Part 8 planning approval in 2014. There was a second Part 8 in September 2017. I'll explain a little bit more in a bit. They are hoping they will be able to tender the project in December of this year, start construction in autumn of next year, and finish construction in 2023. It's 9 years, more really, but it's about 9 years to do this project. If every 2.7 kilometer project takes us 9 years, we're not going to get anywhere. My earlier estimate of 280 years might be underestimating. Okay, so what were some of the delays in this project? There's a lot of novel design elements in this project. The very first Part 8 was, to some extent, some pretty painted lines on the ground that were going to do nothing. And Dublin Cycling Campaign was very critical of this at the time. As a result, there are new junction designs, new bus stop designs, and new curb designs in this project that we've never seen on a cycle project in Ireland ever. So these new design elements have definitely complicated the approval and the design phase. There's been a lot of scope creep on this project. More and more things kept getting added onto it, tacked on. So there's a bit of a Greenway along the Talca in this. There's some repairs to the tea rooms kind of in Fairview Park. There's a lot of landscaping. There's some major utility changes that are kind of been bundled into this project. There's been a huge debate over whether or not Irish Water are paying or not paying for the water main upgrades that were originally in this project. Those water main upgrades have been removed, and because Irish Water wasn't going to pay, and so that has complicated the design process. So dealing with these utility providers is not good. It's very slow. They're very difficult to deal with. Because of the scope creep, the design changes, the cost estimate from the original to what it is now at around 20 million, which isn't just for the cycling infrastructure, there's huge bus improvements and landscaping. Like it is actually good value for money. But it has meant there has been multiple business cases drawn up along the way that has slowed process down. There's been an awful lot of backseat driving from the National Transport Authority, who are meant to be just the funders and approvers of projects, but have been very nitpicky over tiny elements of the design. There's a huge number of community stakeholders, and as this is an old road, there's a lot of old coal cellars under the road, particularly in the North Strand area, which they don't know if they have been filled in correctly or not. And so when you're trying to build a new road on top of them, the engineers obviously need to know what they're building on top of. And so surveying the coal cellars, I think, has slowed this project down by about 6 to 9 months, at least on its own. So the timeline for this has been slipping a lot. Like the plan was not for this to take 9 years. So the way to read this table is in September 2019, the original completion date was Q4 2021. The latest date we have now from November 2020 is that this project will finish in Q1 2023. And as you can see, every month when we get a kind of a project update, this thing slips just a little bit further down the timeline. This thing just keeps not happening. Okay, might also look at Royal Canal Greenway Phase 2. So this is a fantastic new project. Runs from kind of Sheriff Street around an old section of the canal that's been kind of totally inaccessible for decades, under the Dublin to Belfast Railway there, and then over another railway line to join up with North Strand Road. So this received planning approval in December 2015 and opened in July 2020. So it's about 4.5, 5 years from planning approval to opening. There was about 18 months to 2 years of design work before planning approval. So we're looking at 7 years or so for this project. Some of the delay reasons were Irish Rail and Waterways Ireland. So Waterways Ireland out the canal, Irish Rail, they're going under one railway and over another. So they need to be consulted. They, I understand, are not the easiest state bodies to work with. There was confusion to some extent as to whether or not the bridge over the railway, the cycling bridge over the railway there, was tall enough or high enough, depending on the different versions of the Dart expansion plan that are being worked through. Was that bridge going to be high enough to take double track electric trains underwards or not? So that kind of complicated the design. It was can we make a decision? Can we not make a decision? This all slows things down. Council staff were reassigned from this project to Lewis Cross City at one stage. And then the project cost 8 million. There was definitely a year or two where this project effectively sat on the shelf because we didn't have 8 million to build it. I also want to look at a project that was abandoned. So this is the Sandymount to Blackrock project. It was kind of announced in 2016 and I suppose officially abandoned in 2018. The proposal was to some extent to build a two-way cycle track along Strand Road and out along the coast to Blackrock. This is kind of parts of the S2S and some other projects in the area. There were a huge number of complaints, 680 submissions, of which only a handful were supportive of any aspect of the project. There's huge complaints about making Sea Point Road one way, which was just done by the Coastal Mobility Route. Huge objections to some compulsory purchases that were required along Strand Road, People's Front Gardens, and then complaints over a new road bridge in order to close Merrion gates. So interestingly, their solution for this project for Strand Road was to build a cantilevered boardwalk in order to make sure that we could maintain the 2 traffic lanes and provide the cycling infrastructure and have a space for pedestrians. This is very different to what the Dublin City Council Strand Road project is today, which is make the road one way with a 2-way cycle track. I can tell you, if that project hadn't been shot down, if this project hadn't been shot down 2-3 years back, it'd probably be still going through the design and planning phases at this stage. From an infrastructural perspective, this is a very complicated project right beside the coast, which is environmentally protected. And so to some extent, this project getting shut down was maybe a good thing, because it means we've kind of cleared the way for the Strand Road cycle route now, this 2-way on-road cycle track, which is going to be built, I think the council last said is the 15th of January next year. So we're very close to seeing that delivered. Okay. So I want to kind of talk you through like what are the current plans from some of the kind of key bodies here. So this is a cycling implementation plan 2020 to 2024. It was written by the National Transport Authority, but it was never published. We received a copy using Freedom of Information. This was never published because just before they were about to publish it, the pandemic hit and we realized that transport was about to change dramatically. And so this plan really didn't make that much more sense. The other thing that has changed since this plan has been written is we have a new program for government, which includes significant more funding for cycling. One of the interesting tables in this whole document is this thing about the amount of time it should take projects to move through the various stages. And their idea is that it should take 3 to 4 years for projects to go from very first stage to completion. I'm going to be pretty honest, I've never seen a project move through the detailed design phase in 6 months. The shortest I've seen is 9. And many projects have spent 2 or 3 years in detailed design. So to some extent, this timeline in the NTA's cycle implementation plan is a little optimistic. And so to some extent, they kind of started trying to do the maths on estimating how much cycle infrastructure could they build over the next 5 years. They think in Dublin, they can build about 110 kilometers with another 50 kilometers from bus connects. So that's 32 kilometers per year. That's pretty much what we've done in 2020. So what they're saying is we need to do a 2020 every year. Can I skip past that? Okay. Dublin City Council released a very interesting document, or I found it incredibly interesting, about 3 weeks ago. It's report 278/2020. Effectively, it's the cycling project update that they give to councillors. And what they said is because the program for government has €360 million a year for walking and cycling projects, they need to massively up their plans to spend all the money. So the project team has drawn from the lessons learned on how cycle projects have been delivered up to now for what has worked and what has not, and how delivery can be speeded up. This document was also about how their plans for these years 2021 to 2025, they are going to aim from 54 kilometers per over that time period to 150 to 200 kilometers. Still a lot of details to be worked out, but to some extent, I really want to point out this huge investment increase in funding to €360 million a year is starting to have an impact already, in that government bodies are really rethinking how much and how aggressive they should be on their plans. One of the most interesting things in the whole document from Dublin City Council was this idea of 4 tiers. They are going to break their projects up into one of these 4 categories, with tiers 1, 2, and 3 being done under Section 38 of the Road Traffic Act, and tier 4 being done as Part 8 or through on board Penala. So tier 1 are kind of bollards, trials, and wands. Things that would be like this are the new Verburg Street, some of the stuff along Clonbasil Street, some of the stuff on Camden Street. Trials, bollards, wands. Really quick, really simple, some limited benefit. Tier 2 are the minor complexity projects. So this might range from anything from kind of Constitution Hill, where they've installed new curb protected cycle tracks, to something like Strand Road. Strand Road, from an engineering point of view, isn't that complex. It's not really an engineering project. The bigger problem is more the convincing the public project. Tier 3 are projects that are a little bit more complicated than this again. Something like the Fitzwilliam cycle route fits into this category. Not the trial they have done now, but the final project. Because the final project includes changes to junctions and changes to the utilities under the road. So the second you're digging up the road, as opposed to putting something on top of it, your project has gotten a lot more complex from an engineering point of view. And then tier 4 down the bottom are these mega hard projects, total road reconstructions, things like Clontarf to city centre or the Liffey cycle route. Okay, if we look at South Dublin just released their plan called Cycle South Dublin. It is somewhat reassuring to see that councils are now putting out documents where they're talking about making cycling a credible option for people to use. That they want South Dublin to become one of Ireland's most cycle-friendly counties. They are absolutely on the right track here. So the document kind of outlines what they think are now projects, which projects they want to do soon and later, and to some extent how that will all connect together to form an actual network. It's very high level, it's very strategic. There's a webinar on Wednesday being run by South Dublin County Council, which I encourage you all to attend if you're interested. And there's lots of information on their website. Have a read, engage with the project, and try and give supportive feedback. Dún Laoghaire Rathdown, I suppose, have been some of the real stars this year, haven't they? Coastal Mobility Route, the Active School Travel Plan, Carrisford Avenue, Newtown Park Avenue, they've really gotten moving. They don't have a plan that looks like Cycle South Dublin, but I suppose they've been spending a lot of time and effort on this Active School Travel Plan, a network of safe cycle routes across the county for kids to get to school. It's exactly the kind of thinking we're hoping for and looking for. On the left here is a tweet from Robert Burns, who's the Director of Infrastructure in Dún Laoghaire Rathdown, who says, looks like we're going to be busy because of the 2021 budget. And Conor Garrity there, who is responding, was the lead engineer on the Coastal Mobility Route. So to some extent, I think they are probably already hard at work figuring out what they need to do in Dún Laoghaire. Fingal County Council are definitely on the right track here. They just appointed a new Director of Infrastructure, Dave Story, who is leading a new team that looks very similar in composition to Robert Burns' team in Dún Laoghaire. And as far as I understand, they've been out to Dún Laoghaire a few times to kind of figure out what's been working for them and how can they replicate similar. And to some extent, Fingal are absolutely on the right track. Okay, so how do we speed up delivery? We need 3 things: designers, funding, political will. We have the funding. While I think there is a shortage of staff in all of the county councils, we have the staff. We need the thing at the bottom. We need the political will. We need the willingness to want to change. Let's go back to the cycle of change. How do we get change? Okay, I'm going to start on the bottom left. We need to deliver investment that gets more people cycling. We get more people cycling, we get more political will, we get more investment. And this cycle spins. If we take something like the Clontarf to City Centre project, there was the political will to approve the project. We have spent 9 years investing in the project, both in time and money. And we have not gotten anyone cycling. If anything, lots of people have quit cycling that route because of the amount of road danger they've experienced. It's a very slow way of turning the wheel. How can we turn the wheel faster? How can we get more people maybe in the enthused and confident category cycling more or more often? How do we get those quick wins that are needed to get some of those people who are interested but concerned cycling? Because if we do that, we have spun the wheel. We've spun it once. And from that, it's easier to spin it again and again and again. Okay, let me show you some examples of how we can quickly spin the wheel. This is a very simple intervention from Dún Laoghaire Rathdown. This is Roebuck Road. Before is on the left, a narrow advisory cycle lane. They converted it to a mandatory cycle lane. Unsurprisingly, that wasn't respected, and so they've installed a few wands. This route, even though it is not safe for all ages and all abilities, is now much safer now than it was a few weeks ago. This probably took one of their engineers hours to design up. A very short amount of time to get one of their staff to some extent go out there with a line tool, rip up the old line, put the new line down, and put some walls down. This is a project they probably spent about 1 week doing, but it's going to have an impact. It's going to make things a little bit safer for those who were kind of interested but concerned, but mostly the confident and enthused. It's also probably going to keep people cycling for longer. I have quit cycling in Dublin, I think about 3 times, almost always because of like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Never a serious incident. I've been very lucky to some extent. I can't even use the word luck. We shouldn't be basing road safety around luck. But I have stopped cycling multiple times in Dublin because of just like 1,000 tiny little conflicts that are just frustrating, demoralizing. And so I quit. Do 1,000 of those and those 1,000 paper cuts disappear. People like me stop quitting. You've turned the wheel. These 2 projects in Dún Laoghaire, Newtown Park Avenue on the left, Kerrison Avenue on the right, built in the space of weeks of months of design work. Very quick investment that are delivering huge increases in the number of people cycling to the schools on both of these roads. We've turned the wheel. Grange Gorman Road Lower. This is a set of bollards across a road. From an engineering point of view, the design work on this was hours. The implementation was hours. The large investment here from the design team to some extent comes in communications and public engagement, not from engineering. This project at the minute is actually currently under a public consultation. There is some support, there's some opposition. If you want to see this project maintained in a way that stops this rat running traffic and creates a safe route for people to walk and cycle to school, as well as a great route, I think, to some extent to connect from the city centre up to kind of Fisborough and Cabra, you need to send an email to Dublin City Council. You'll find information for that on their website. Constitution Hill is another project Dublin City Council have done where they resurfaced an existing road, removed the second outbound traffic lane, and built curb-protected cycle lanes on both sides. There used to be a cycle lane here, bit of paint at the side of the road that everyone drove in. How was this done so quickly? It was Section 38 on an existing road where they reallocated space. The interim Liffey cycle route project. This has been rolling out in phases over the last few months. Construction started in April. We'll hopefully see work start on the South Quays from civic offices out to Houston in the next 2 months, with the entire project completed by March next year. This is not as quick as some of the other projects, but the impact for this has been huge. Section 38, reallocating road space, very quick. Coastal mobility route, Section 38, reallocated road space, huge impact. I kind of want to compare and contrast this against the Liffey cycle route and maybe even the Sandymount to Blackrock scheme I talked about earlier with the large cantilevered boardwalk. The Liffey cycle route is probably not going to be built in Dublin for at least 5 years, given where it is in the planning process, how early it is in the design phases. It is still 5 years away, probably. That's if all things are going well, in my opinion. I've seen dates where they're like, oh, it'll definitely be all finished by 2022, and I don't believe them. It doesn't sit right with me based on how slowly some of the other mega projects have moved. And this is a mega project. The quays are a protected structure. You're going to onboard Penala. The Liffey is environmentally protected. You're probably going to onboard Penala. That means you are going through a 2 to 3 year planning approval process. The project is incredibly engineeringly complex. And if the budget for this turns out to be 60 million, I wouldn't be surprised. 60 million for one project. This project is going to move very slowly because to some extent, instead of making hard decisions about the space that exists on the current road, we have come up with very complex engineering solutions to a political will problem. There was not the political will to reallocate road space on pinch points on the quays. And these pinch points are so narrow that to some extent, if you want to maintain the bus lane, which we absolutely do, huge numbers of buses use the Liffey quays. And we want the cycle route, you'd need to get rid of the cars on some sections of the quays. And there wasn't political will to do it. And so as a result, we have ended up with a very complex engineering project that is going to deliver cycle infrastructure 5 years from now. So compare and contrast quickly designed and quickly built in an iterative fashion using Section 38 in the space of weeks. A project that is going to take 5 years and has already been 8 years in the design and planning phases of some extent. If you want to do things quickly, and we do, there's a huge need for urgency. Whether or not you just want a safe cycle route because we're fed up of people dying on our roads needlessly, or because of climate action, or for the many other reasons like public health, air pollution, noise pollution, that we want to reduce the amount of traffic on our roads and increase the number of people walking, cycling, and taking public transport, we need quick action. We don't have time for 9-year projects. We don't have time for complex engineering solutions. If we want to move quickly, and we do, it's more stuff like this and less stuff like this. At times, complex engineering projects will absolutely need to happen. We can't always reallocate road space. Some of the complex engineering projects like the Dodder Greenway or the Royal Canal Greenway absolutely need to happen. But if we want to have big impact sooner rather than later, we need to be looking at 80% of projects in this kind of ilk and 20% of projects of this kind of ilk. So we want to do this quicker. It's all about reallocating existing road space. And this is a political problem. It's not an engineering problem. Okay, how can you help? So I just want to end with these 2 slides. This is the 2-way cycle track on Kerriswood Avenue in Blackrock. I actually grew up in a housing estate just off this road. The amount of fantastic local campaigning on this is the reason it has been built so quickly. So Clara and Cynthia, who have just appeared there on video, are in the photo on the right. And to some extent, this started with emails to councillors saying we want a cycle route. And the councillors went off to the council and asked for a cycle route. That kind of got the ball rolling. They kept at it. All politics is local. All cycle routes are local. You need to act locally. And they did. They kept up on the councillors. They kept up on the council. And this project kept moving through the design phases. And to some extent, I think because Robert Burns kind of took over in Dunleary, there was an even greater push to take this project that had started design and push it forward. To some extent, to push back on the National Transport Authority, who thought this 2-way cycle track was a bad idea. This is what the locals wanted. Clara and Cynthia stood out at that junction just outside Kerriswood National School, handing out leaflets to parents. The amount of public support they got for this project, particularly from parents in that school, was absolutely vital in getting this project moving quickly. Politics is local. We need to act locally if we want to build political will to get projects like this built and built quickly. So, okay, I'm just going to finish with this one slide. How can you help? With Always, I am always going to say join Dublin Cycling Campaign. This charity is run entirely by volunteers, but there's a lot of projects we would wish we could fund. To some extent, the number one thing we need to do to get to the next level is to employ staff who will help facilitate us. That's probably a 2 or 3 day a week job to start off. London Cycling Campaign has close to 30 staff at this stage. Just to give you some kind of comparison, they're obviously a much bigger city and a much bigger organization. But Dublin Cycling Campaign is only going to become more effective with more staff. The number one way we're going to fund that is by increasing our members. The 20 quid you all pay per year does really add up, but we need to add a few more 20 quids in if we're going to pay for staff. There are lots of things you can do as well. Engage in the lots of public consultations that everyone mentioned at the start as well. Grange Gorman Road, Active School Travel, Cycle South Dublin, the projects in Fingal. Get engaged, be supportive, get talking. Talk to your local politicians, talk to your councillors, talk to your TDs. They need to hear this. They need to hear that this is an election issue for you. They are going to be much more willing and much more engaged if we talk positively to them. Encourage your family, friends, and co-workers to start cycling. Obviously, don't start encouraging 8-year-olds to cycle on roads that are not fit for them. But you may know people I have a few coworkers who have started cycling because of the interim Liffey cycle route. They're definitely in that confident and enthused category, but the little bit of infrastructure and a little bit of encouragement from me got them cycling. That's turning the wheel. They are now cycling advocates. They are very good at making sure they email their counsellors. There we go. We've turned the wheel. Talk to your neighbours and volunteer at Dublin Cycling Campaign. We can build a cycle network in Dublin quickly if we want to. Yes, it is an engineering problem, but it's a much bigger political problem. How we allocate space, public space that is shared and owned by all of us, is a political question. We can get it done. Okay, I'm just going to leave it there.